So today's presentation is a general one, and it's in many ways a seasonal one. It's on colds and flus, but it's also one that has some very useful and important aspects just about dealing with infection generally. And it's no secret, if anyone's been paying attention, of course, that periodically we get you could say frightened by various threatening epidemics, one virus or another circulating around that may or may not become a problem. And of course, we go into a lot of fear with that because it's something unknown. After a while, everything settles down and it becomes part of the background. There are certain viruses right now that are killing hundreds, if not thousands of people, but you don't hear about it in the news. Nobody pays too much attention to it, and you don't really give it much thought in your day-to-day activity. But something like Ebola, because it's new and supposedly deadly, provokes a lot of anxiety and fear, even though the chances of it affecting you are, you could say, far, far less than a car accident or tripping in your home or falling down the stairs or slipping on a banana peel or something like that. But these are the things we worry about. And the important thing here is that you could say nature has given us something to protect us called an immune system. And an immune system is something we carry around with us. It can be compromised, it can be weak, it can be low, or it can be strong. But a lot of that has to do with factors under your control. And if you have a strong immune system, then you have really very little to fear from these threatened epidemics, viruses, whatever. But I wanted to take a specific look at the issue of colds and flus. Of course, this can cause a lot of misery for many people, and so it's nothing to sneeze at, as the expression goes. But it's important also to understand what it is we're talking about. We use the term cold and flu very loosely and throw it around without really thinking about what we mean. There are three things that happen generally that produce similar symptoms. And the first is the most likely cause of those symptoms in us, and that is what we could call a natural seasonal cleansing. This is something built into your body. Nature triggers it in the spring and the fall in order to create a natural detoxification and drainage. And this has to be done periodically, because even if we're following the best diet possible and regimen, there's still a certain amount of buildup of toxicity in the body naturally that needs to be flushed out. So, of course, nature also provides, in the spring in particular, for example, various green plants in the budding early leaf stage, like dandelion leaves, for example, or fiddleheads, or other things that could be used, even be put into a tea, a very weak tea that helps to promote this detoxification cleansing. In the fall, it's a bit different. That's where we need to go to the, you could say, the root vegetables, to meats, a little more solid, but not solid foods, more like warm broths and nourishing soups and things like that. So when people complain about cough, congestion, low fever, aches, tiredness, it usually has to do with this natural seasonal cleansing. It's going to be anywhere from mid-September to mid-October, generally in the northern hemisphere, depending on how close or how far you are from the equator, but it's within that time frame. The old expression that we hear is that for this, you can take a pill and it'll be over in a week. You can do nothing and it's over in 7 days. The message being that it really has nothing to do with any disease process. It has to do with a natural cleansing. So what you need to do is support it, and we'll look at that in a minute. However, if you end up with strong cough, congestion, fever, pain, fatigue, but it lasts several weeks, this is really a cold. This is generally a viral infection. We call it the flu because it's so severe, but it really is a cold. And so what we call a cold is really this seasonal natural cleansing going on. Occasionally, but very rarely, it can be so severe that it may last several months and you feel very much like you've been hit by a truck, and sometimes you're even hospitalized because of it. This is what we could call the true flu, a serious disease, no question, but for someone who's healthy, very unlikely to contract, and certainly if you did, you could easily fight it off. So, what people call a cold generally is really a detoxification. I see this over and over again in most people that we treat and deal with, is that they think it's a cold. That's our first thought, and we associate cold with a viral condition, but it's not. It's this natural seasonal cleansing. And what we call a flu is really just a true cold. And it's also important to remember that very few people, as we'll see, actually get the flu. A fair number of people can get a cold, but very few people get the flu. Now, there's a lot of hype and misinformation circulated, unfortunately, also by the authorities, for their own reasons, obviously, about the flu. And here's a graph, for example, you can find online that indicates how many people died in 1918 of the flu, the so-called Spanish flu, which was the last really major epidemic of the flu, supposedly. And you can see it looks pretty frightening. And then on the far right, you see the number of 36,000 as the number of people who die on average from the flu in the United States. These figures are for the United States. Well, it's scary. 36,000 people is a lot of people. And we're told it's the 7th leading cause of death. But if you really go into the actual statistics, and they are available, the Center for Disease Control by law is supposed to publish these things, and they're subject to, you could say, audit and everything else, so they can't really lie on those. But as Mark Twain pointed out, there are lies, damn lies, in statistics. And if anyone's worked with statistics, you realize that they can be manipulated in many ways to produce whatever outcome you want. The fact of the matter is, if you actually look at the statistics, is that generally fewer than 200 people a year die from the flu. So that puts it amongst the 100 out of 113 causes of death. Very different from 36,000 people a year and the 7th leading cause of death. Well, why is this? Well, for some reason, the Center for Disease Control takes the figure not of flu deaths, but of pneumonia and flu deaths. Now, they don't tell you that, or if they do, nobody seems to pay any attention to that. They just pick up on the word flu. And so, yes, it's true that 36,000 people on average a year die of pneumonia-related deaths. But, as you'd say, generally under 200 people a year die of the flu. So why did they put the two together? This is just an example when I looked at it a number of years ago for the statistics for 2001, which was the most, they're usually 5 or 6 years behind the date in terms of publishing these things. If you look at their actual work table where they have to record, and this is subject to, you could say, audit and everything, the deaths for influenza in 2001, it was 257 deaths. But if you look in more detail, and they provide the detail, the number of deaths identified purely due to the flu is 18. The number with pneumonia and then they identified the flu virus is 6. The number with some other respiratory manifestation already and they identify the flu virus is 12. And then we have a category where they think the flu virus was involved, but it was not identified. Now, what does that mean? Well, in another study that I looked at, the Center for Disease Control pointed out that for every 10 cases of samples that doctors sent in for verification, and the doctor was convinced it was the flu, for every 10 of those samples, 8 of them basically were not the flu. So only 20% of the ones that the doctors are convinced are the flu are really the flu. So in this case, here we have a situation where the physician concerned is convinced it's the flu, but no one bothered to verify it, so they count it as that. But if we took the 20% figure, again, we'd have maybe 40 or 50 people. Those with pneumonia, and people think there's the flu, but it hasn't been actually identified, 111, etc. So when you really come down to it, a very small number of people likely, well, certainly identified under 50, and maybe another 100, 150 possibly with the flu a year instead of the 36,000. So what about the Spanish flu, this great flu epidemic that everyone is frightened might happen again, as a number of years ago with the swine flu scare? The number promulgated is anywhere from 500 to 650,000 deaths in the United States and worldwide several million. The fact of the matter, again, is when you examine the statistics in more detail, there's only roughly about 10,000 deaths linked to the flu. Now that's serious enough, clearly, but it's nowhere near the 650,000 deaths that are usually quoted. So this is somewhat like, well, 36,000 people die a year of the flu when it's really dying of pneumonia. And if we say 650,000 people died of the Spanish flu, well, again, they died of many other things. What's strange about the Spanish flu is that most deaths occurred in young, healthy persons. The flu normally, the death of in the flu normally occurs in very young and very old. But the pattern with the Spanish flu was totally different. It occurred in young, healthy persons, mostly soldiers returning from Europe from World War I, which had ended in 1917, 1918. What they don't tell you is that these soldiers who went over in 1917, when the United States entered the war, were heavily vaccinated with many vaccinations at that time. And these deaths did not take place over several months. This was something that happened. Sometimes a seemingly healthy person would contract what seemed like the flu symptoms and die within a few days to a week. So this is usually something other than the flu. So here's the pattern of deaths normally from a flu at that time, and then the deaths associated with the Spanish flu. And you can see the age distribution really changed. Well, this is very, very unusual. I won't go into details of the Spanish flu. You can study it a lot if you're interested, but the key thing to remember is it's not the big flu epidemic that they make it out to be. Then we have the issue of vaccination. And the myth that's promulgated, of course, is that your only protection against the flu, other than washing your hands and that kind of thing, is a vaccination. The fact of the matter is that the vaccination provides little, if any, protection. Even the Center for Disease Control, in its own publications every year, although they don't promote it, but you can find them, they admit that generally speaking, on average, the flu vaccine is somewhere from 3 to 15% effective. And this is measured in some very strange ways, but if they're admitting that effectiveness, well, that's way below any placebo, for example. We could just hand out a placebo pill and normally claim 40 or 50% effectiveness. The problem here is that even there, in their statistics, they count all those who get vaccinated and don't get the flu as having been protected by the vaccine. This is the usual game. But since only 3 to 5% of the population actually get the flu in any case, it's not really very scientific to claim all those people who got vaccinated and didn't get the flu relates to the flu effectiveness. So what is it that we can do? Well, first of all, remember that most of the time it's a seasonal detox. This is something your body needs to do. You should encourage it. You should support it. It's actually healthy for your immune system. It's what's going to allow you to fight off the more serious viruses throughout the winter. And if you don't do that, if you suppress it with drugs or other measures, and you try to tough it out and not rest properly, etc., you're actually lowering your immune system for the rest of the season. So the old advice here in terms of, you know, plenty of bed rest and fluids and nourishing broths and greens and other things. Vitamin C is very critical because the vitamin C is, you could say, the part that is missing. Well, it's the ascorbic acid, but it's the part that's missing from our own body's capacity. We are one of the few mammals, along with the guinea pig, that can't make their own ascorbic acid. So we have to take in ascorbic acid, which we call vitamin C, in order to supply the material that holds the body and the connective tissue and the cells together. And so extra vitamin C, but all of the other things in terms of supporting the cleansing activity. It's like taking a couple days off and just resting and making a nice soup, some herbal teas, extra greens, juicing, all of that. If you get an actual cold, this is what people call the flu. I had the flu because it lasts for several weeks usually if you don't treat it directly with a homeopathic or homotonic remedy. You need to do the same, but you can add in some extra vitamin D because usually, especially in the fall and the spring, that's missing. And vitamin D is your body's natural antiviral agent. You also add in the extra superfoods to give your body the extra energy it needs to fight the virus. And then, of course, you can always get an energetic medicine, a homeopathic or homotonic medicine. You can either do it through your first aid kit, through us, through the clinic. You can ask for, you know, depending on the symptoms, the remedy will be different. And because the the cold viruses are constantly changing and mutating, the remedy in any given season will be a bit different, but it's easy enough to tell from the symptoms. The actual flu itself, very few people are going to get. This is something where you're out of commission for a month or two unless it's treated. For that, if you're concerned, if you worry about your immune system, and again, generally speaking, if you're under treatment with us, you shouldn't have to worry about that. You can get what we call homoprophylaxis. You can get an immunization against the annual flu. But you should also be taking extra vitamin D anyway. And if you're undergoing treatment through Heilkunst to remove various blockages and traumas and inherited disease factors, then you're going to boost your immune system naturally and, generally speaking, take yourself out of any possibility really of coming down with the flu. However, the important thing to keep in mind is that, as I said at the very beginning, there are viruses around. Some of them are more virulent than others. Some of them come every year, and we've gotten used to them. Some, like Ebola, seem to be new. Microbes, viruses, spirochetes, all of these things. This is nature. It's just full of these things. But we have been taught over the years to come to rely on something on the outside to protect us. Quarantine, drugs, vaccinations, even supplements. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a certain amount of supplementation which is warranted, but the mindset we have is that we're somehow vulnerable. We're a victim, and if we're not careful, some bug is going to jump on us and we're going to be infected. But this is not the reality. 99.999% of the time, we're protected. We're protected by something that is also part of our nature and comes from nature, our immune system. So the bigger question is, how active, effective, strong is your immune system? And the good news is generally that you can do things, and very simple things, that are totally under your control to make sure that your immune system is strong. Because right now, there could be viruses and bugs and various sorts circulating around, and you have no idea. We don't see them. We don't know where they are unless someone identifies them, and then we start worrying about them. But your immune system knows them, your immune system is aware of them, and your immune system is, you could say, taking care of business while you're sleeping. So the best thing to do is to support your immune function. We want a strong immune system. Unfortunately, a certain amount of the advice, constantly using hand sanitizers, constantly wiping everything down and disinfecting everything, is reducing our exposure to, you could say, natural germs. It's this exposure, this testing ourselves against the germs out there that acts to strengthen our immune system. Of course, we don't want to do anything foolhardy, but a little exposure to dirt, to uncleanliness, can be useful for your immune system. This is now becoming more and more obvious and clear to people, and it used to be to our parents and grandparents, but we grew up with this idea that cleanliness is next to godliness when it comes to health, and that's not true. The other thing is that we need to be aware of the things that build up and, you could say, tear down the immune system. Well, if you're listening to this podcast, of course, you're aware of the things that tear it down. Sodas, processed foods. We could say almost anything that's from the shelves on the center aisle of your supermarket, with a few exceptions. All of that, anything sugar-laden, anything processed, anything with chemicals in it, preservatives, all of that tears down your immune system. Just a can of soda, for example, can contain anywhere from 5 to 7 teaspoons of sugar or sugar equivalent. And that can knock your immune system down. 1 teaspoon of sugar alone can knock your immune system down 20 or 30% for a few hours. So if you're in the habit of doing that, or people are, then you're walking around with you could say, your energy shield down for the most part. Now, you don't want to go for the diet sodas or diet foods, etc., because they contain chemicals that are just as bad for your immune system. So if you're not eating the usual junk food, fast food, processed foods, etc., then your immune system is in pretty good shape. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't have challenges or issues, and that's what Heilkunst treatment is intended to address, by removing those specific blockages that you could say interfere with your overall immune system function. What we need to do is to, you could say, become immunophilic as opposed to germophobic. We've developed a certain germophobia, and as I mentioned earlier, this means that we don't challenge our immune system. I remember my father, when I was out in the garden helping to bring in the harvest in the fall, he would, take a carrot out of the ground, wipe it on his pants roughly, and give it to me to eat. And when I said, "Well, it's dirty," he said, "Oh, a little dirt is good for you." Well, we've recognized that there are beneficial microorganisms. In fact, 98, 99% of the microorganisms in the world are beneficial. They're the good guys. It's only a very small proportion that are truly the bad guys. And even the ones that we think are bad guys at times, like yeast or fungus or whatever, they're not truly bad guys. They're only bad guys because the environment within our body essentially turns them into what we consider to be bad guys. They're really like teenage delinquents. They've been steered in the wrong direction. They need some activity, some direction, some supervision in order to channel their energy in the right way. And that's the case with many of the microorganisms that we complain about. They're actually a very essential component of what's called the microbiome. This 5 or 6 pounds of microbial matter in our gut, basically, that we need in order to digest food, extract nutrients, produce various vitamins. Without that, we would die. So if we're germophobic, we take in too much that is trying to kill everything, and we do it indiscriminately, as opposed to using an energetic medicine approach, which is very targeted. If you give an energetic medicine for the chickenpox virus, that's all it's going to go after. It doesn't go after anything else. Same with cholera or Ebola or whatever, Lyme. It's only going to go after that which it has a resonance for. So, but our microbial matter in the gut also needs to be fed, you could say, and it's fed to a large degree by eating healthy, fresh, natural foods that contain enzymes and probiotics, prebiotics. All of these things help to feed that 5 or 6 pound microbiome in the gut that we need and we depend on, and is a very critical part of our immune system. So you could say we can take necessary precautions, but if we disinfect everything constantly, then we're never going to, you could say, train our immune system to handle the microbial life out there. It's not going to go away. It's always going to be there. It's always been there and will continue to be there. But if you have a healthy immune system, you don't have anything to worry about. You can walk around and you don't have to worry that someone's inadvertently going to cough on you, or if you're traveling on a bus or the subway or a train or a plane, that someone there might have something that might be potentially threatening. Yes, your immune system may get challenged and you may produce some symptoms, but those symptoms in most cases are not a symptom that you've been infected. They are a symptom or symptoms of the fact that your immune system is meeting the challenge and repelling it, because it's usually over within several hours to several days, and then you are fine after that. So that's a sign of a successful challenge being met by your immune system. So simple symptoms like that don't mean you become infected or you've come down with something. They actually mean the opposite. So that's the basic message, is to not let fear of viruses, microbes, spiral sheets, etc., bacteria take over, because fear itself lowers the immune system. What you want to do is have a realistic attitude, avoid obvious exposure, because why expose yourself unnecessarily, but also don't be in a state of fear, as this cartoon here shows, where you basically, you could say, cut yourself off from the outside world out of this fear of being infected. Your immune system is there to look after those things, and look after things you're not even aware of, that you're constantly being tested and challenged by. That's what nature does. And you also have the control when it comes to building up your immune system in terms of what you take in, what you eat, what you expose yourself to as far as nutrition is concerned. So stay away from the non-nutritional, so-called non-food items, and you could say take in that which is going to be healthy for you and at the same time build up your immune system. And if there is a specific threat, like Lyme or Ebola or cholera or the flu, then we can target that specifically and provide what we call an energetic immunization or a homoprophylaxis that stimulates your immune system and that aspect of your immune system that targets a specific microbe. But you also want to build up your general immune system, and that you do, as I mentioned, through simply healthy measures in terms of diet, exercise, sunshine, fresh air, nutritional food, etc. So you have a lot of control, and you don't have to live in this state of fear of what's going to happen to you and feel like a victim. You're actually much more powerful than you think in that regard. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has any specific questions they might want to ask. You can type the question in the chat box, and I'll try to address them, although most of this is pretty self-explanatory. See, someone is typing, so we'll just wait for that. So, one question, vitamin C through foods or a specific supplement? Well, if you're looking for the whole vitamin function, which is vitamin C, then you need to get it through foods. Unfortunately, most foods, even if they're fresh and supposedly contain vitamin C, these days contain very little vitamin C. So in most cases, you need to supplement, but you're not going to get the whole vitamin C function. What you get is ascorbic acid or some version of that. And that's fine because your body has and can produce all the other things, but it can't produce the ascorbic acid. So a simple vitamin C supplement is fine, whatever you can get. There is a new form of vitamin C called liposomal vitamin C, which is surrounded by, you could say, fatty acids, and therefore are seemingly easier for the body to digest and also for the cells to take it in. And Dr. Mercola has a very good brand, and there are others out there. But any kind of vitamin C, you can use water-soluble emergency packets. Everybody sells those. They also contain a few other vitamins, or chewable tablets if it's for children, etc. Either way is fine. If you can get the actual vitamin C function, which is very expensive, then you can certainly use those as well. I'm wondering if an energetic immunization, example chickenpox, could be given amidst working on the timeline. Yes. If you're concerned about exposure at that time, or if there's an epidemic going on or supposed epidemic going on around where you are, yes, we can do that at any time in the timeline. You can treat for anything acute, anything that is immediate in the timeline. You just suspend the timeline for a very short period of time and treat for that, and then continue on with the timeline. Okay, oh, So. You mentioned superfoods. What are they? Superfoods are concentrated, generally concentrated greens that contain various types of greens: barley green, wheatgrass, broccoli, spinach, seaweed extract, etc. You name it, they put them into different formulas, but they're extracted using a very special water extraction method, or called the Swiss method, because the Swiss came up with it, which doesn't damage the enzymes and vitamins in there, or if it does, minimally. And you just buy them in a container. All you need is a scoop in some water or a smoothie, and you drink it, and it's like eating a whole bowl of salad or greens. It's a very quick, efficient way of taking in nutrients because they're loaded with enzyme, micronutrients, cofactors, etc. All the things that we're normally looking for to build up our body and immune system. And it's very easy to take. It's inexpensive when you consider what you'd have to buy and all the time and preparation involved. Your health food store would carry a whole range of these. There are various companies. Ask the health food store. Some are generally better quality and more reputable than others. And in this business, you kind of get what you pay for. But they're a very efficient, effective way of bypassing digestive problems. Many people have digestive problems, which means that even if they eat healthy foods, they can't necessarily take in the nutrients because of various problems with assimilation, absorption, their digestive functions compromised in a number of ways. Well, these superfoods tend to get around that. They don't require digestion, really. They're kind of absorbed by osmosis through the gut wall and taken in that way, and very easy for the cells to use right away. Do maple syrup and honey pose an issue to the immune system? No, but the rule here is everything in moderation. You know, we're told sugar is bad, but the word sugar really means white processed sugar. You know, white processed sugar is a bit like cocaine in its effect, very similar. And high fructose corn syrup, which you find in almost everything now over the last 20 years, is a bit like crack cocaine, you could say, in terms of its effect on the immune system and the body generally. But maple syrup and honey are whole foods. They contain vitamins, minerals, cofactors, enzymes. And the key here is to use them in moderation. You wouldn't want to take a whole cup of maple syrup or honey, or even several tablespoons necessarily. But small amounts of maple syrup and honey are actually food and can stimulate immune function. Honey is, if it's not pasteurized. So you want to find unpasteurized honey, particularly organic honey. They can be very, very good. Now, of course, every case is a bit different. If you're diabetic, or if you have a particular genetic mutation or some other factor temporarily that we can't get rid of, and it seems that honey, even in small amounts, can't be taken, well, you may have to suspend that. But in general terms, organic, unpasteurized, raw honey is very, very healthy, and the same with maple syrup. In fact, one of the best cleanses you could do, it's called a master cleanse, is warm water, maple syrup, and a little bit of paprika, because it has a very stimulating effect in terms of detoxification. And the maple syrup itself supplies nutrients, as does the honey. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So we'll stop the presentation.